Okay, welcome everybody. So it's a great pleasure to have such an international audience, and also we are few, but we are the best ones, of course, because we are here. And so nice to see you again. Hi, Daniela. Welcome here.
Hi, Silvia.
I'm very happy to see you here.
Me too.
And so this is the third official Dialogic meeting that we do as a newly established thematic group 12. The name is Social Love and Solidarity. But in reality, this is a sort of a practice that we had also before being officially formed in the International Sociological Association, because this thematic group has origin in a research network called previously Social One, and we were used to do this kind of meetings, informal meetings that are called Dialogic meetings. Dialogic meetings, they are simple. It's a simple method. An encounter with the scholars coming from all around the world and with different perspectives, and of course belonging to different schools, but discussing on a topic related to the concept of social love and solidarity, which is the focus of our thematic group. But I think the specificity of our dialogic meetings is the term, the adjective dialogic. Dialogic means, of course, is made by two words, logic, so the logos. Of course, we talk. We are sociologists, so we talk a lot. Maybe we can talk a lot. But also, we would like to build together the knowledge. Okay, this is the sense of this term, but at the same time, with a specific method that is expressed by the prefix, which is dialogic. This prefix is very important for us because it's related to resonance, we can say. Yes, is being challenged by the thing that and the person who is talking, the scholar. And so we have this wishing, and also we would like to have this kind of sense of being really questioned and going through each other and our perspectives as well. So this is, of course, the way of doing, and we are convinced that this method is the specific method of building knowledge together in a communitarian way. So with this kind of meaning, and also with this kind of climate, we would like to give our warmest welcome to our special host today. He's Arthur Bueno, so thank you very much for being here. He is young, okay, we can say, and we are very proud of this. He is young, he's coming from Brazil in reality, but he lives in Germany, and he's president. He works now at the University of Passau, but he's also president of a very important association, famous all around the world for social theory, which is the Georg Simmel Gesellschaft Association. And he's also president of the RC35 in the International Sociological Association, which is conceptual and terminological analysis. And I know he's also vice president of at the European Sociological Association of Social Theory Research Network. Now we are cooperating together for, yes, a congress the next year on related topics with method and theory as well. And so he's very interesting. I had the opportunity to meet each other because we knew each other about our works. But we met during the last European Sociological Congress in Portugal. And so I invited him to talk about resonance and revolution, which is a very interesting and very insight, important insight for us, especially this kind of binomial, which is very okay. I don't know. I leave you the floor to say how is this binomial, because it's a sort of paradox, but very interesting. So Arthur, thank you very much for being here. I give you the floor. Usually, I don't know how does it work. Usually, you can talk and you can explain your topic for 40 minutes, and then we can open the discussion and the floor for, yes, only to be, yes, to have feedbacks and also questions, and in order to say how much this kind of topic is important for us. Okay, thank you, Arthur.
Thank you very much, Silvia. I mean, it's a pleasure and an honor to be invited and to be able to discuss with all of you. I mean, as you said, it was really a happy event that we met in Porto. And I've heard about you, about your work for so long because of your Brazilian connections and my connections that still remain to Brazil, even though I'm in Germany. And I think, as you mentioned, I think the topic, I feel very much at home here because what I'm going to talk about fits, I think, very well with the focus of your thematic group, which I'm also, I mean, as a representative of those other groups and associations, I'm happy also to support in any way that you find suitable. And I think this fits very well with the topic that I'm going to talk about, resonance. And I think it was interesting when we met in Porto that we saw, like, okay, I was talking about resonance, you were talking about social love, and we would like, yeah, I think we're talking about the same thing, or yeah, well, let's see if the same thing, but in the same direction in any case. So yeah, and it's a pleasure to meet you all virtually as well. I hope someday we all meet in person as well. So what I'm going to present, I mean, is a talk. It's based on a text, a short text. So I might not use all 40 minutes, but let's see. As you mentioned, sociologists like to talk a lot. But it's a short text for a book in honor of Hartmut Rosa. So then it's an engagement with his work, but also, let's say, a critical engagement with his work. So I will read the text and comment as I go. Let me share my slides. Is it working? Yeah, yes?
Yes, it will.
Okay, great.
You can see everything.
Okay, so the relationship between resonance and revolution is far from straightforward. Rosa's theory expands Marx's critique of capitalism in novel directions, similarly aiming to transform modernity's alienating conditions through a simultaneous and concerted political, economic, and cultural revolution. And these are Rosa's words. At the same time, Rosa's theory provides valid reasons to exercise caution regarding central aspects of Marxist conceptions of social emancipation. Notably, Rosa's emphasis on receptivity and unavailability involved in resonant world relations diverges from the focus on agency and instrumental control prevalent in most notions of revolution. So in short, I mean, the idea here is that, well, when we think about revolution, we think about action, about, instrumental control, taking control of the world. Whereas Rosa's theory of resonance, I mean, his notion of resonance rather emphasizes receptivity, openness to the other, or what Charles Taylor calls patiency, to counterpose to agency. So this idea of being, open to the world. And also the idea, which I termed unavailability, that's how Rosa calls it, the idea that we cannot control the world either. So as much as you try, you might buy a car to try to be happy, or have an apartment, or etc. All these things are important, but you still cannot control that this will lead to happy, resonant relations. So there is a tension here between agency, instrumental control on the one hand, and receptivity, unavailability, openness on the other. Furthermore, democratic resonance as an adaptive mode of stabilization, that's how Rosa calls it, it is fundamentally at odds with the antagonism associated with what Rosa calls repulsive world relations. I mean, this antagonism, however, plays a significant role in Marxist notions of radical change. So here there is a contrast between struggle, which is emphasized in Marxist conceptions of social change, and what Rosa calls adaptive relations, which means relations that shape the world rather than antagonize it. So if we take this into consideration, a struggle for resonance may then appear as a contradiction in terms. It could entail the risk of the means, agential, instrumental, antagonistic, undermining the ends, receptive, unavailable, and adaptive. So one could think, and I think this is for most part Rosa's idea, that one cannot have a struggle for resonance because resonance does not involve struggle. So if you struggle for resonance, what you end up with is something different. I will argue, however, that the concept of resonance is not only politically compatible with, but even intrinsically linked to struggles for radical transformation. So it's not only the case that I'm arguing that, well, we can achieve resonance through struggle, but my argument is a little bit stronger. My argument is that there is an intrinsic link between radical social struggle and resonance. And I will do this by reinterpreting Georg Lukács's analysis of the emergence of revolutionary consciousness through the lenses of Rosa's theory. And I expect to show that resonant world relations may not simply result from, but as I said, arise through the dia of dialogic, through collective struggles against capitalist alienation. Now, this dialogue between Lukács and Rosa is made possible by certain parallels in their diagnosis of modernity. In History and Class Consciousness, and this is the focus of my interpretation of Lukács, not his other works. So in History and Class Consciousness, Lukács imparts two emphases to the concept of reification. First, he highlights how reification inverts the relationship between subject and object. The world comes to dominate, as it appears independent from, the agents who create it. While encouraged to assert control over the world through calculation, individuals are led to act in accordance with allegedly pre-existing laws, resulting in a passive adaptation to prevailing conditions. So the idea here is that, well, how do we conceive of being, under modern conditions, the hegemonic self-understanding of modernity. How do we conceive of being active? Well, we discovered the laws of the world. I mean, this is very clear. For instance, the laws of economy. And then I know how to be a successful entrepreneur because I know how to calculate to use these laws in my favor. But Lukács's idea is that, well, but when you think in terms of laws, this means already that you're accepting something that you cannot transform. So you're accepting reality as it is, while thinking actually that you are transforming reality. So that's one way of understanding the inversion of subject into object. The more we think we are active subjects in this sense as calculating subjects, the more we actually accept the world as it is, as something independent from us. At the same time, and this is my second point, Lukács conceives of reification as a process of real abstraction that entails the growing loss of the qualitative properties of people and things. Both human activity and its objects are mechanized and fragmented into arbitrary operations. In this sense, reification inverts the concrete and the abstract. Mechanical forms come to subordinate the organic material processes on which they rely. So if we think of, well, Marx already argued this, that when you are in the factory, right? I mean, time is dominated. The form of time that dominates is not qualitative, fluid time that has different qualities, but rather what dominates is abstract time, the time of the watch, right? So similarly, Rosa examines the spread of specifically modern structural logic, that of dynamic stabilization, highlighting a homology between Marx's formula of capital, money, commodity, more money, and the principles operating in other social spheres, such as modern sciences thrust from knowledge to research to increased knowledge, or let's say, surplus knowledge. So I'm pointing out the fact that for Rosa as well, I mean, Lukács, that's the way that both Lukács and Rosa understand modern society as according to an idea that the logic that is prevalent in the economic realm sort of expands itself to other spheres of society. Rosa also underscores how this logic is adopted by individuals in their own cultural self-understanding. Modernity is marked by the promise that one can make the world instrumentally available, attainable, and accessible. Yet this promise is self-undermining. The more one tries to fully appropriate the world, the more distant and hostile it appears. So I'm highlighting here that Rosa also argues something similar to what Lukács argues with regard to the concept of reification in terms of the inversion of the relationship between subject and object. Rosa says, the more we try to control the world, I mean, that's the promise of the modernity, that, you know, the more technology we have, we will be able, you know, to control the world. But the more we try to do this, the more actually we feel that the world is something hostile to us. Moreover, in such a repulsive world relationship, the possibility is hindered for one to touch and be touched. And these are very important terms for Rosa. When the only options are to exert dominance or submit to it, one ends up losing contact with the concreteness of the outer and inner world and the possibility of establishing a meaningful relationship to it. So I'm trying to highlight here that also the second dimension of Lukács's diagnosis of modernity is also present in Rosa, this notion that, you know, what is organic, what is concrete about our lives, I mean, the capacity to touch and be touched is also lost in this process whereby we try to control the world via calculation, via instrumental action. Now, so there are important similarities, but despite these similarities, an important difference concerns how each of them, Rosa and Lukács, conceives the undoing of this condition. Lukács's two lines of critique converge in his conception of the proletariat as the identical subject-object of history. For him, the working class would be in a position to realize both the idealist horizon of the full appropriation of the world by a collective subject and the romantic prospect of reversing the subordination of the concrete in relation to the abstract. What I mean, we can leave a little bit aside, I mean, the philosophical part of this argument. The important here is that I'm trying to highlight that those two dimensions of his critique of reification lead to two solutions that are embodied by the proletariat. So if we feel that we are actually objects instead of subjects, well, the proletariat is actually, for Lukács, who is creating the world, because who is working? The proletariat. So the proletariat is in a condition, despite being the most reified object, right, subjected to processes of reification, is also the one who has the capacity to become really active if collectively organized. At the same time, what the proletariat does is to be involved in the very concrete processes of, you know, production of use values, for instance. So again, the proletariat is already is subordinated by abstract forces, but is in the position to reestablish the primacy of the concrete, so to speak. Now, going to Rosa, at first glance, it might seem that Rosa's theory fully abandons the first idealist horizon, standing closer to Lukács's second dimension, his anti-capitalist romanticism. Indeed, Rosa is highly critical of the modern pursuit of autonomy, understood restrictively, and I quote him, as the attempt to make the other available to oneself, to control the other. Still, I want to argue that elements of autonomous agency are not entirely absent from his concept of resonance, though they do take on a different form within it. So in line with the Romantic tradition, Rosa stresses our ability to listen and to be affected by the other, and this is what he calls affect. Confronted with the alienation inversion of subject into object, one shouldn't merely strive for dominance, but rather reject this repulsive relationship altogether, reject the relationship of dominance. Rather than responding to passivity with more instrumental activity, one should embrace vulnerability and openness to the other. This entails the possibility that one is not only affected by the other, but also able to affect the other, to move them. And this is what Rosa calls emotion. So in this way, a different form of self-efficacy, one can say a different form of autonomy emerges. So instead of involving the instrumental appropriation of the world, self-efficacy or autonomy acquires what he calls a responsive character. It is through the interplay of affecting and being affected that one comes to experience one's own transformative force. And I quote, "The experience of resonance implies something like the experience of an independent counterforce that resists any mechanical availability." So, in conclusion, I mean, to this part, on both its diagnostic and therapeutic aspects, Rosa's theory engages the two lines of Lukács's critique of reification. Still, while history and class consciousness presents an idealist conception of the revolutionary subject, we just saw the revolutionary subject as somebody that, you know, is able to encompass the world, to control the world, finally, you know, to have a sort of identity between oneself and the world. Rosa proposes a non-instrumental form of self-efficacy whose realization isn't tied to a specific social class. This perspective sidesteps some of the problematic implications of Lukács's proposal, which I just addressed, such as the persistence of this idea that one should be able to control the world in its entirety. At the same time, it leaves aside and thus raises a question whose answer Lukács believed to have found in the proletariat's class consciousness, namely the question, where can one find the driving forces to promote the radical transformations required to overcome dynamic stabilization, establishing the conditions for expanded resonant world relations. So my point here is that, okay, there are similarities between Rosa and Lukács, but there's one element that is present in Lukács that is not present in Rosa, namely the idea that that we have available a subject, a collective subject, that is able to transform society. What we have in Rosa is, on the one hand, a diagnosis of alienation. So, okay, we know the world is alienating. We have, okay, a proposal of a solution, resonance. So, okay, we know where we want to get at, but we don't know how to go from one to the other. We cannot see that in the analysis of society. Where are the potentials for, you know, radical social transformation, revolution, as he says, that is able to establish institutional conditions for resonant world relations. Not only that we are able to establish resonance in our own personal lives, but that we can establish conditions, social conditions, for expanded resonant relations. So this is the question that I want to address. How to move from alienation to resonance? How can we understand that? So I propose revisiting Lukács's arguments regarding the emergence of revolutionary consciousness in order to develop this point. So crucially, Lukács described this process as involving a series of mediations arising from the intrinsic limits of reified experience. So in other terms, Lukács shows how, or he, you know, imagines a path whereby one can see how the proletariat, from its reifying conditions, can progressively move towards emancipation. This is precisely what's missing in Rosa. But my idea here is that interpreting Lukács's arguments through the lenses of Rosa's theory might then indicate the imminent potentials for collectively moving from alienation to resonance. So this reconstruction will reveal, I claim, the unexpected contours of a revolutionary struggle for resonance. Okay, so now we move to the main part of my presentation. So I will try here to describe a path using Rosa's terms, but using Lukács's ideas, so to speak. So the starting point of this path lies in what Lukács terms immediate consciousness. And just an important point is that I'm describing the path as it appears to us, so as subjects. So let's imagine first, so we are individuals fully on board with capitalist reality. So here, first, in this first stage, the subject and object of the social process, I'm quoting Lukács, appears to exist in rigidly twofold form, each external to the other. In Rosa's terms, individuals here are driven by the promise of rendering the world available, attainable, and accessible. Seeing themselves as instrumentally self-efficacious subjects confronting passive objects, They do not consider their concrete connections to the world. They do not see themselves as being affected by the world, nor as capable of affecting it. The only conceivable relationship here is one based on control via calculation. So we all know this, right? Just do it, go, transform the world, be a successful entrepreneur, and so on and so forth. This is an alienated position, although, as Lukács stresses, one at this point is unaware of it. So in seeking to affirm their self-efficacy, the individual does not respond to things in their concrete qualities, but rather adheres to abstract, seemingly unchangeable laws. Chasing the promise of making the world available, one merely adjusts to the structures of dynamic stabilization, reinforcing one's own ineffectiveness. So considerable forces thus anchor individuals in this state. And just to be clear again, I mean, I'm describing in contemporary terms this sort of perspective of the person who fully believes that being a successful entrepreneur of the self or an entrepreneur will lead you to happiness, to both success and happiness, as long as you're able to, earn more money or control more objects or control better your employees and so on and so forth. So considerable forces anchor individuals in this state. Nonetheless, as Lukács points out, they may somehow sense the limits of their alienated self-efficacy, of their alienated state. These limits are manifested, for instance, in the resistance of objects to becoming fully available. Regardless of how much one seeks to control the workers one hires or the natural resources one appropriates, they invariably resist this process, whether through decreasing productivity, exhausting themselves, or engaging in explicit contestations. So the world resists our attempts to fully control it. The object of instrumental activity then appears split. It presents itself, on the one hand, as a mechanical, rational thing, capable of being partially instrumentalized, as something that you can calculate and dominate. But also, on the other hand, it appears as containing an organic, irrational dimension, and these are Lukács' terms, organic or irrational, dimension, hindering complete appropriation. There is something in the object that escapes and thus appears irrational. Why can't I dominate this natural resource, this worker, and so on? To be sure, this organic aspect is not irrational in itself, yet it is in this manner that it appears to the individual driven by the promise of making the world available. For some reason, the objects eludes one's grasp, not allowing themselves to be fully appropriated. So there is something that is resisting. Nevertheless, at this point, this resistance only appears as a deficit in calculation. Okay, maybe I didn't calculate well enough. Maybe I wasn't as instrumental as I should have been. So in this sense, the limits to appropriation are perceived as surmountable, indicating that rationalization must be carried further. Oh, and I forgot to move on with the slides, but anyways, this is the idea. Now we move on to the second position, so to speak. One's relationship to the world takes on a different shape when the appearance of self-efficacy can no longer be sustained. Beyond merely halting attempts to fully instrumentalize it, the world in emphatic resistances may lead an individual to question whether, instead of being a subject, they are in fact an object. What I mean here is that, well, I was describing this subject that is trying to control the world, and the world somehow is resisting. These resistances can be so strong that one comes to the point of realize or thinking, well, maybe I'm not dominating the world, maybe I'm being dominated the world. So while I'm trying to find a job and I cannot find a job and I cannot leave unemployment, for instance, that would be an example. But for Lukács, already the experience of the worker in the factory indicates that, and I quote him, "In every aspect of daily life in which the individual worker imagines himself to be the subject of his own life, he finds this to be an illusion that is destroyed by the immediacy of his existence." So for Lukács, the worker can realize in the factory that he's not a subject, that he's actually an object, because it's clear that he or she is not dominating anything, but rather being dominated. One does not need to agree with Lukács on the proletariat's actual inclination towards this position, a topic much debated since then, to acknowledge the significance of this shift in experience. This is what is important for me, this shift in experience. At this point, the appearance of self-efficacy breaks apart, leading to a conscious recognition of a once hidden passivity. The objects, okay, so instead of seeing itself as instrumental, self-efficacious, one sees oneself as instrumentally inefficacious. So, the object's resistance no longer signals that one must keep moving forward, seeking to appropriate the world through calculation. Rather, it implies that one's actions are moments in an abstraction process in which the individual is no more than a cipher reduced to an abstract quantity, a mechanized and rationalized tool. These are Lukács's words. What once appeared to be self-effective activity, facing occasional but surmountable limits, is now disclosed as self-ineffectiveness. To be sure, this step is not emancipatory in itself. Confronted with the perception of being subjected to forces beyond their control, individuals may simply strive to adapt and comply. They say, okay, I'm dominated, but, well, that's the only possibility. I'll just try to adapt myself to the situation. Yet even submission can be a complex task. One's body might resist obeying. For instance, a person accustomed to rising early for work may start grappling to leave their bed without realizing, without having clear reasons why. They might then believe something is wrong with them. Much like the external reality, their inner world resists being made available. It also seems to harbor an organic, irrational element. This idea that I don't know, I mean, there's something wrong with me, but I don't know what it is. I mean, why doesn't my body respond to what I want it to do? Why can't I just wake up early in the morning as I used to do? But precisely this inner resistance holds a crucial role in the revolutionary path envisioned by Lukács. Without this resistance, the individual would persist in attempting to affirm their instrumental self-efficacy, oblivious to their own inefficacy, to their own passivity. Recognizing oneself as an object allows for an acknowledgement of one's passivity and of the limits of one's own body. We realize, right, that we are not able to fully control the world, control ourselves as we want to. However, this resistance remains incomprehensible. At this point, human qualities appear as mere sources of error. This are Lukács's words. Even if the individual no longer perceives itself as the agent of rationalization, its relationship with the world still centers on instrumental self-efficacy. The difference is that one now sees oneself as its object rather than its subject. The situation changes, and now I'm going to the third moment. The situation changes, however, when this internal element is no longer perceived as an incomprehensible limit to rationalization, but as intrinsically linked to it. By acknowledging that oneself, both as an object of calculation and as the locus of an organic resistance to it, one may grasp the connection between these two dimensions. The individual's difficulty in getting out of bed can then be understood as an expression of a malaise, or, for instance, a depressive condition, linked to the hardships faced in their work. What had previously appeared as an incomprehensible error, what is happening to my body, now reveals itself as suffering, linked to the social practices in which one participates. When one's errors take on a new meaning, they no longer appear as an explicable hindrance to optimization, but as an outcome of the pursuit of optimization. I might realize at this point, well, actually, there is some meaning here to what appeared as an error. I'm suffering, actually. I'm suffering. I'm depressed, and I cannot go to work because I'm depressed because of the experiences that I'm facing in work, for instance. So the individual can now perceive their ineffectiveness in a different light. As Lukács argues, one comes to realize in one's own life that every quantitative change to which one is subjected corresponds to a qualitative variation which one experiences. So, I mean, his example is that he says, every quantitative difference in exploitation means to the worker a qualitative, something qualitative in their experience, right? Something that for the capitalists are just numbers, more profit, less profit. For the worker is like more exhaustion or less exhaustion or not being able to wake up in the morning and so on and so forth. It means something qualitative, something concrete about their lives. So observing how their subordination to dynamic stabilization affects them they, I mean, the workers or the individuals in general, I mean, recognize themselves as living beings with the capacity to feel affected by something. One acknowledge at this point that one not only possess a body which resists abstraction, but is a living, vulnerable body that suffers and experiences abstraction. So at this point, basically, one recognizes that one really is a body, a vulnerable body. My body is not something that simply must obey my commands, but it's something that I am. I am vulnerable. A body, a living body, can suffer. So suffering attests to the individual openness to be unaffected by the world, and hence to the denied potential to develop an intrinsic interest in the world. So vulnerability has these two meanings. It means something that I suffer, but also means that I'm open to the world. At this point, one starts moving beyond the confines of atomized individuality. By acknowledging their vulnerability in relation to the world, the person no longer perceives themselves as a bounded, instrumentally oriented individual, but as a living being immersed in concrete life processes. Their experience takes on a collective character, right? Because being a living being means being in life, and life is formed by other living beings. So practices of solidarity and mutual care may emerge at this point. Perceiving in their life the subjugation of the concrete to the abstract, the person can come to recognize not only their capacity to be affected, but also that of other living beings. So the other can also be affected. I can recognize that I'm not only the only worker in this factory that is suffering this, but my fellow workers are also suffering this, and so on and so forth. So as Rosa points out, recognizing the other's affect is also acknowledging that they should be listened to. So, it is at this point that we're moving closer to resonance, so to speak, because we discover a crucial element of resonance, which is affect, both our capacity to be affected, but also that of others. Yet this step is not yet sufficient for a significant social transformation. And still the conditions for it are starting to arise. When suffering is recognized as the outcome of a process of real abstraction affecting a vulnerable body, the resistances to this process can appear now as one's own resistances, that is, as the expression of a body's vital force. So what appeared before as an error or mere suffering may appear now as actually, this is my resistance. It's not something that is simply happening to me, but it's something that my body, which means myself, is doing, so to speak. So this is a further step. So the individual's difficulty to get out of bed is no longer viewed simply as an error or as suffering. It comes to be recognized as a refusal to go to work. My body is refusing to go to work, which means I am refusing to go to work. Once perceived as a sign of weakness, this now emerges as an assertion of strength. And this highlights the intrinsic connection between affect and emotion. The individual realizes that their capacity to be affected is intertwined with the ability to move the world. So my capacity to suffer also means my force, my vital force to refuse. One may then acknowledge that dynamic stabilization depends on this ability to move the world. It relies on this ability. Dynamic stabilization, or reification, can only maintain itself by appropriating, by exploiting the emotion of living beings. In Lukács's terms, one may now perceive oneself as the bearer of a concrete force or a concrete labor force or labor power that not only resists or suffers rationalization, but also underpins it. One now realizes that, well, actually, this force of refusal is also being used by the capitalist system, so to speak. They need, the capitalist system doesn't move itself by itself, but it moves itself using our capacity, our emotional capacities, our power, our concrete labor power, and our concrete powers in general. So alienating abstraction reveals its dependence on the concrete matter it seeks to dominate. This decisively alters the understanding of power. Power no longer appears as the activity of an instrumentally self-effective subject, but rather as the manifestation of a living force shared with other beings participating in the same vital processes. So just as the ability to be affected is collective, also the force of emotion is inherently collective. Now, once acknowledged, and now we're moving to the further step, once acknowledged, this force can be harnessed for purposes other than sustaining alienating social struggles. Social structures. The ability to move the world can be reclaimed and redirected. Insofar as one recognizes, well, actually, the system of exploitation needs our powers, our force, our power to move the world. Well, maybe we can use this in another way. So this ability to move the world can manifest, for instance, as resonance within a group whose members mutually enhance their emotive capacities and bring out a form of self-efficacy that is no longer instrumental but responsive. I might think, well, I will use my energies not, to throw them all into work, to be exploited, but rather I will use my energies, my capacity to move the world, to move other people that I'm close to. However, this ability can also be channeled more broadly against the established principles of dynamic stabilization. No longer appearing simply as an error or as a silent refusal, the force of emotion can be collectively organized to radically transform existing institutions. Once we recognize that we have this power, well, why not collectively organize it? So a strike, for instance, represents an organized reclamation of this force, right? We say, we're taking our power from your use, and we show that we have this power, that is ours. A protest serves as a public demonstration of this power. So at this point, the struggle for resonance becomes explicit because attempts to transform the existing structures of dynamic stabilization are rarely unmet with aggressive reactions. So when you try to reclaim your power, you meet with aggressive reactions. In fact, this struggle was already present in the previous moments. So in each of the positions described, the opposition to dynamic stabilization manifested in a different manner, as we saw, as error, as suffering, or as refusal. Now it takes on a different form, a collectively organized form, aimed purposefully at institutionalizing the conditions for expanded resonance world relations. So a form of self-efficacy emerges that is not instrumental and individual, but rather responsive and collective. Rational activity no longer appears as the act of an isolated, calculating subject, but is now mediated by a shared living force, emotion, based on a shared condition of vulnerability, affect. So we know what we have here is the organization of our living powers or resonance capacities rather than, an instrumental individual. And this is collective because these capacities for resonance are inherently collective because they're grounded in our condition as living beings. So this is not a once and for all achievement. It's not that we followed the path, we pursued the struggle, and now we have resonance, and that's the happy ending. Rather, this is an ongoing process. Rather than leading to a complete appropriation of the world, responsive self-efficacy involves a never completed mediation between resonance's constitutive moments. And it can never be completed, first of all, because for Rosa, and I agree, these emotive and affective capacities, they cannot be fully controlled. So there's always something that evades our grasp, and so we need to continue this path again and again. And second of all, some form of alienation is never absent. So this is more or less like a beneficial circle rather than the end of the path. So now to conclude very briefly, what am I trying to show? Let's go back to the questions that I posed in the beginning. So we saw that there was, at least for Rosa, a sort of tension between, or incompatibility between resonance and revolution. And what I'm trying to show is something different. right? So contrary to the view that resonance and revolution are incompatible, this reconstruction reveals their intrinsic connection. So first of all, the notion of a purely adaptive resonance is then shown to be insufficient. Resonance necessitates radical social struggle because it is by confronting the alienating structures of dynamic stabilization that we recognize our capacity to be affected and the capacities of others to be affected. It is because of our resistances to alienating conditions that we can discover that we're actually open to the other. Conversely, the idea of a merely antagonistic revolution is also exposed as inadequate. Revolutionary struggle necessitates resonance, because it is by opening ourselves to the other that we can recognize our shared force to move the world and direct this force against alienating structures. Thank you very much. And this is yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you very much.
So I made it under 40 minutes, but
No, but
yeah.
it was only an idea about the time. So thank you very much. It's very interesting, and every time I have new ideas, but maybe we can open the floor to for the discussion. So I think so. Please.
Arthur, my name is William Calvo. I'm from the University of Michigan. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very intriguing as we deal with this kind of social change. So, I mean, I really like this connection that you do, you know, background revolution. You know, my question is, how do we can promote transformation or this kind of revolution? Because it's failed for us here that we have failed in many ways, in many things, you know, like our election just happened and people are, you know, unexpected doing things, deciding things, you know, like very much like at the first layers that you describe, you know, like people think the system will be in their favor. So if they continue working with the system by itself will regenerate and create conditions of inclusion. Others think that it's a malice of themselves or the other people. So that's the word, because you're judging the other, you're saying the other is not performing how it is expected. But my question is, how do we can promote, you know, the transformation that we want in a way that respect each person own layer of understanding of the situation, you know? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, William, for your question, your comments, and nice to meet you virtually. Yeah, well, this is the $1 million question, right? But but I mean, first of all, yeah, indeed, I mean, so I have some solutions, I mean, theoretical solutions, but indeed, we must recognize, first of all, that the conditions nowadays are indeed much worse than in other times in history. So indeed, I mean, and there are many ways of explaining this. One can explain with neoliberalism and how successful it was in the previous decades to dismantle unions, for instance. And one can find structural reasons for that. I mean, there are Marxist authors that argued that there is a sort of a systemic crisis, not, I mean, a decreasing demand for labor, which means that labor is indeed losing power to negotiate, to make demands, and so on and so forth. What I can say a bit more in optimistic terms is, first of all, that how I conceived it, I mean, this process is already happening. So I think this is important. I mean, when I'm talking about revolution here, I'm not talking about something that will happen, but something that is ongoing. So this is how I understand current social struggles. And I've been giving examples about the worker, but I think one can understand in this way also feminist struggles, anti-racist struggles, and so on and so forth. Because in all of these cases, what is involved is well, I think these processes of discovering through struggle how we are dominated, and at the same time through struggle recognizing our capacity for change. So this is one way of understanding. At least, I mean, at least it's ongoing. But again, as you said, I mean, the conditions are not the best. Second of all, my second attempt to find some optimism in another text, I try to understand from the conditions of neoliberal individuality, subjectivity, so to speak. So, for instance, I mean, when Lukács wrote, I mean, he overestimated already the workers' capacity for this change, because he said, I think, because I mean, what he was right about is that the more you're subjected to this, to rarefying conditions, the more, I mean, the more you have the motivation, at least, to change them, because, I mean, your life depends on it. That's how he explains it. For the capitalist, their life doesn't depend on changing the system, but for the worker, their life depends on it. Where Lukács was too optimistic, because he didn't consider the fact that when conditions are very bad, the possibility of changing them is also very bad. So people, of course, then rather think, well, if I'm going to fail, I might as well just continue how I am, right? Now, let me try to remember what I mean. My argument was with regard to neoliberal subjectivity is, oh yeah, it's sort of, it involves a process both of proletarianization, in the sense that we are more and more precarious, we're more and more, but also bourgeoisification, in the sense that more and more there's a dissemination of the idea that we are entrepreneurs, that we are subjects, and this creates conditions that are that can lead to, you know, to the acceptance of conditions how they are, but also creates a sort of which word to say, sort of a ticking bomb, so to speak, because okay, we think as entrepreneurs, so expectations are high, but we are more and more proletarianized, so conditions are very low. So the dissonance between expectations and realizations is the gap is very, very large, which means, I mean, there is at least the possibility that at some point this fire will, yeah, that a spark becomes a fire. And we can see, I mean, the past decade was already an example of the social struggles of the past decade, is already an indication that something, you know, accepting reality as it is not as simple as it was. But I guess I didn't answer your question, but that's the best I can do, I think. Yeah, thank you very much again.
Thank you. 1 second, Andrea, because I know maybe Daniela wants to talk. Very spontaneously, no, because Arthur was talking about feminism and so on. So that's why, Andrea, is it okay for you if talks only related to the topic? That's why.
Yeah, thank you, Silvia. Thank you, Arthur, for this presentation. Actually, in your first part of presentation, I was still thinking, because something was resonating in me. Right this morning, I was trying to write a paper on the vulnerability of the body. And in the specificity, I was analyzing the different meaning of body in hospital biomedical birth and in home birth. And I was trying to figure out how to explain this different perspective on the body as something irrational that needs to be controlled, something suspicious that can be against us. And this is the biomedical model, whereas in home birth, body is something like an ally to us, an ally in the whole process of birth. And so in all your first theoretical part, you were just offering to me the theoretical framework to explain that. And in the second part, you end up talking about the organic body and the vulnerability. So thank you, because you just gave me the answer, the theoretical answer to what it was in my mind this morning. So this is a fortunate coincidence. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. I don't think I have much to add, just to say that maybe, I mean, even this, you know, because there's a movement about this, right? It's not only the experience of this or that person. So maybe, perhaps, the struggles of this movement can also be thought in that sense, in the sense of affirming a different relationship to life in general.
Yes, yes, indeed. The home birth movement, one of the core philosophy is that the world will be changed by changing the way we come to the world. So if we come to the world in a way, in a confrontive way, in a way where we experience in our first day of life violence, for example, or the disempowering of our own mother, these values are reiterated in the social organization. So that's perfect. Thank you.
Indeed, yeah, thank you very much. I take this opportunity also to stress something. I mean, where I came from, you know, to write this paper, because so I come from a tradition of critical theory where there's a lot of emphasis on struggle. And then there is, you know, Hawes's theory, but also, you know, new materialisms and so on that emphasize the fact that we, you know, that life is made of active, or we can think about Latour, for instance, right? That living beings are active in a way; they're not mere passive objects, right? And I think maybe this example that you just gave shows how, you know, these two things must be thought together. You know, in order for us to affirm a different relationship to life, to birth, we need to struggle. It's not only that we're, okay, so I read the resonance book and now we can do, no, because the conditions are not there. So yeah, thank you very much again for the comment.
Yes, Andrea, thank you, Daniela, because it was really in line on what you are studying. So that's why I've asked you to have an intervention. Thank you, Daniela. And so, Andrea, sorry.
Yes, no worries, no worries. Thank you very much, Arthur. Very interesting and fascinating. So my comment or question, or let's say input for a dialogue, is related to the relationship between self-consciousness and social transformation. I think that's a very important point, which might also be, but let's see, a point of divergence between a social love theory and resonance. But let's see. So my point is the following. We know that in traditional Marxist theory, self-consciousness is a necessary condition for social transformation. So that his theory is rooted into the dialectic between the working class and you know, who is possessing the tools for producing. So unless there is like an awakening of the working class, a social transformation is impossible. We know that. I believe that this group of, many of them are here, you know, researchers and friends and people who are doing research on social love. They really believe that rather than self-consciousness of social groups, it's rather the recognition of the other, which is really necessary for social transformation. Rather, if I'm not wrong, I understand that this establishment of resonant relationship is a little bit still rooted into sort of a recognition, consciousness recognitions of social groups, of the identities of two social groups, in order for them to establish resonant relationships among them. So I believe that not only this is like not necessary for establishing, for example, relationships rooted on social love, but it might also be somehow dangerous. And I have I know that you are a social theorist, but maybe here I ask you to move a little bit into an uncomfortable zone, with a few empirical examples. I have a few in mind, 3, for example. So we have an example, for example, from an example, for example, sorry, in like working context, that there are researchers who discovered that like there is a very nice like social love dimension when people donates, for example, the days off that they have, like to benefit from other people with different like conditions for health or whatever. So like working relationship is to me an empirical example of a context in which you need to recognize the other's identity rather than developing like self-consciousness in order to establish, let's say, change relationship or like social transformation. The same is, for example, for management of migration flows, I believe. So as long as like a country affirms its own identity, no, as a sort of a self-conscious collective agent, but also the group of migrants does the same, maybe they can resonate each other. You can understand the others, but it would be really difficult to like to establish policies which are, you know, more on the more welcoming, or you know, really to put yourself in the shoes of the others and try to improve the situation. And the third empirical example that I have in mind is, for example, in a care relationship, in the health care system, no, in which rather than like being self-conscious collective actors in order to, let's say, to provide a health service, you really need to recognize the other and to put yourself into the shoes of the other, because otherwise there will be always conflicting interests. So voila, this is a little bit my input, and yes, I hope it was not too empirical, but for sure it's in the social reality then that we have to sort of do proof of concepts of our theories. Voila. So thanks again, Arthur.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And no, not too empirical. I think it's really important indeed to work with concrete examples. Yeah, I think I've been thinking. I mean, I've been listening to you. I'm trying to understand where the I think it's a dialogue indeed regarding this question where the incompatibility lies, and which means depends on how we understand self-consciousness. So let me see. I mean, so I had the impression that the way that you framed self-consciousness mean a sort of identity of oneself or one's group, understood in more or less rigid terms, right? I had the impression that, you know, that your argument is that when we are self-conscious in this way, you are actually building gaps between oneself and the other. And rather, we should, in your argument, recognize the other. That's one dimension, I think, of the question you proposed. I was thinking also, but I'm not sure if this is what you meant, but I'm also thinking of how, does this self-consciousness, does it need to be, conscious in the way that, like an explicit idea, etc., or rather it's more a sort of practice? And I would say that, I mean, I think this is an interesting question because, so I don't have like a, definite answer to it, but I think in my paper, what I'm trying to develop, it's a sort of a form of, it is a form of self-consciousness in the sense that, well, the end of this process needs some dimension of, organizing, rationally organizing collectively. So let's take, so that it's not too abstract, let's take your examples. The practice of, donating the days off to other people. The persons who are involved in this, you don't need to have a theory of anything to participate in this. But one does need to organize this, to have this idea in the first place. And then if one meets obstacles in this process, if the company says, no, you cannot do this, for instance, then you have really, really the need to organize if you want to continue with this practice. So this is in favor of self-consciousness, but I would agree that, and this is what I try to do with these examples of the person having difficulty in waking up, feeling that their body doesn't respond, and these are these are forms of experience that one does not need to assume a sort of theoretical point of view in order to move from one to the other. One doesn't need to be a theorist of resonance in order to have resonant experiences, because one may, exercise their capacity to be open and to hear the other, and without, again, thinking in strong identitarian terms. And moreover, I think this sort of conception that I'm trying to articulate here on the basis of Rosa goes against any rigid identity, because throughout this path one discovers, when it comes to the point where one discovers that one is a living being with the ability to be affected by the world, it's just one more step for you to recognize that other living beings are also affected by the world, and so I must care for them, and I must care for myself, and these things are not incompatible. Um, and so, yeah, I think I lost the thread of my thought, but and so of course we might think in terms of identities. I'm not against identity, because I think that's how we articulate, we understand the diversity of the world, and how alliances are possible. But this conception, I think, goes against rigid identities, because after all, we might even include, non-human beings, have the capacity to be affected, and so we must be cared for, and also we have the power to transform. So these are my thoughts. I mean, we can continue the dialogue if you like, if I misunderstood something. Okay.
No, this is very interesting, I think, because yes, you are talking about this kind of concept of identity, which is not so flexible in this moment, but it's important to have a dialogical identity, and that's why I think there is this possibility to go through these concepts as well. So only to say something, but maybe Andrea can add something more. Andrea, would you like to add something?
No, I mean, it's totally, I understand this. So my worry is more about, is related to like a concept of a collective identity, or like the process that leads the social groups to acquire self-consciousness, the way in which they do it and the results of it. Because if the process that leads social groups to self-consciousness then sort of enables them to impose their own view of the world, then we have problems in policy making, in like everything. Rather, we need to find a way to keep sort of an open idea of a collective consciousness or identity. I mean, it's something which needs to keep inside your own identity as a social group, but in a way that this does not impose your own instances, your own ideas, your own needs to the other. Otherwise, there will always be conflicting interests among the social groups. So yes, that's why we cannot have positive social transformation if we have let's say collective identity without recognition of the other. So there are two things that need to go together in order to have like a positive social transformation. But yeah, I totally understand what you said. Yeah.
Even at the individual level, in reality.
Yeah. Of course. That's the base. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Silvia, just
Of
one more
course,
comment.
because of course
I
it's a
think because yeah, I mean, because I come from these two traditions, so to speak, the tradition of self-consciousness, but also the tradition that emphasizes, the body and, fluid, our the fact that we're human beings. And I think precisely that's one way of understanding the path that I try to articulate, is that, first of all, one needs to leave this perspective, this instrumental perspective in which, okay, you have identity, I have my identity, and we fight. And then by leaving, this means acknowledging I've been saying openness, one could say fluidity, one could say porosity, like the fact that we're all, you know, as much as we can find differences, we're all permeating each other, you know, we're all affecting each other. And so we need to acknowledge that, that differences aside, these differences are sort of interpenetrating each other. But then, and so this is an important moment, but then I do think that further, we need to go back to identity at some points, right? Whether it's, let's say, you know, the work example you gave, if the company owner says no more donations, then we need to establish an identity of workers and the company owner, or people who want to donate and those who are against that. Yeah. So I'm trying to bring together these two ideas in a way.
So Maria, and maybe we can collect some, yes, some contributions. So there is Maria, and then I saw Joseph as well, because he started to, yes, standing his hands. So Maria and Joseph.
Okay, thank you very much. Muito obrigada, Arthur. It was very, very interesting. It gave me lots of ideas, and it was connecting like different topics. And I was just reflecting, maybe closer to, in line to what Daniela just shared. And I was wondering if it's, I mean, it's not a question, it's more like an open comment, and I'm still reflecting on that. Is there a determinism with the specific condition a person is coming to the world, like primary socialization, and how, for example, family is structured, and it will create at some point a specific condition to create this social resonance. And in that way, there might be cases for people for whom, due to a specific family conditions or others, were wounded, and how socially we can, is it possible to contribute to healing and to reconstruction, and it will be kind of more a psychological aspect, and it is usually performed individually, more than socially. It's more the person going and seeking maybe for psychological help or other kind of treatments. But how socially this could be, how to say, fostered in order to contribute and make people have better conditions in their inner life. You were just mentioning how this position of waking, and there's a lot of factors, not only the place where they are working, but how they are and how they build their mind structure, and I mean, there are lots of other things. And yes, for me it will be more on how to going beyond psychologists and doing this personal inner job, but also socially helping this to help someone to rebuild her or himself in order to create and foster social transformation. It's not necessarily a question, but just something I was thinking on, and just to share.
Thank you.
And Joseph? Thank you, Maria.
Yes, thank you very much, Arthur. And then as you were sharing your experience, it was nice for me because I was like thinking of my dissertation I did, for my master's, especially with that participation, collection, that social collectivity, especially with community people or community development. So I was thinking that most of the time, when you were talking about resonant and that of revolution, most of my thought was like, revolution in my own aspect and my own thought is like something negative, like I think to revolutionize something. Instead, in a positive aspect, it has a very good impact, especially when individual first try to be resonant of his or herself, that try to know himself better, and then that of reflect on the community, and then all the communities can come together so that they can do a collective revolution in a positive way. It's really important because it's inspired that of social love that creates that connection between people, and then to see how they can able to go further to develop themselves. For me, it's really important. And then I said, yeah, this is really a key thing, because social love is born from that of what, when I know myself, and then I try to give what I have in me, to give it to others, and then it affects a lot, because not only with me, but I just has to share it, and then we can do a collective job together, or collective social development, which is very key. Thank you very much for your sharing.
Should I answer, or we collect one more, Silvia?
I don't know. Francesca, do you have, maybe we can collect, I don't know, if you, as you prefer. Would you like to stop? Maybe it's better. As you prefer.
We can collect. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Francesca.
Hi, Arthur. Nice to meet you. I'm Francesca. I will ask you a question about the affect and the emotion dimension, which are related to suffering, the first affect, and the refusal emotion. And when you spoke about these two dimensions, I thought about the specifically emotion rage, anger, rage. And I would like to know if, in your opinion, the specific emotion of rage can be the key to access to these two dimensions. So if these two dimensions can be defined specifically in terms of rage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Annie, there is another
Annie.
one. Want to collect? You have to collect a lot, because I have another question.
Sorry.
Arthur has. I don't know. Please.
All good. I'm happy to hear.
Not only questions, of course.
I'll just say yes to all the questions.
No, just a small thing. I found this intervention very interesting because every time when we thought about a revolution, we thought about a unique event, like a big event. And I don't think in a negative way, but in a positive way, but so utopic maybe. And this is the key to think, well, every single protest can be a revolutionary, and like birth in home can be revolutionary. Like you think it's an event very intimate, but instead it's very collective, because it's very revolutionary and very resonative. I don't know. And like I think this is an invitation to a no resignation, and that is, I think, is the key of this difficult time. I don't know, to climate action. Now the climate, so, or the neoliberalism. I think very, very big. Well, if we can think like small actions can be revolutionary, I think it's very potential, very, very powerful.
Thank you. Should we continue, Silvia?
As you prefer, because I think this is one point. Maybe this is the key point related to all the patients. I don't know.
Sure.
Donato, would you like to add Donato or not? Would you like to?
Yeah. I'm happy to hear.
Okay, Donato.
Come on, Donato.
I'm here.
My friend.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. I have perhaps my question is a little bit off topic, but I wanna share it. My question was about the history of sociology, and it's about the possible influence of Georg Simmel on Hartmut Rosa's theory, especially about the first part of the presentation. I thought about the Lukács idea of the relationship between subjects and objects, and I think that there is that this topic is also we can find this topic also in the first chapter of the Philosophy of Money. And another comment was about the idea, the word resonance and the word Wechselwirkung both come from physics language. That was a comment that I want to ask if this symbol framework could help us to better elaborate also Hartmut Rosa's theory about modernity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, all of you for, I mean, really interesting questions. Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to meet you all as well virtually. Let me see. I think I'll just go in the order. So Maria, yeah, it's a really rich question. I think there's a lot of ways to go here, but I'll try to focus on the emphasis that you put by the end of your question, which is going beyond psychology. So how can we deal with wounded persons coming from difficult family conditions, social conditions? How can we deal with that socially and not individually? I think I can give some points, I mean, some directions here, but I will stress that let's say the more individual parts are also important. But first of all, I mean, socially, I think first of all, I mean, one idea that is sort of implicit in this framework that I'm trying to develop is that social movements have a therapeutic aspect. In the sense that by engaging in social struggles, we reflect on ourselves, and reflection also as an activity that involves connecting with the others, and being able to connect with the others without so much fear, for instance. So there's, I mean, because I mean, the idea of resonance has a very central sort of therapeutic aspect, right? That's why it can serve some sort of also, can be linked to some forms of self-help or something like this. You know, we need to discover how can we be more resonant with the world, how can we be more open, and so on and so forth. But what I'm trying to stress in this paper is exactly that there are limits for this sort of individual resolution of the problem of alienation, and ultimately we're already dealing with it collectively, right? I mean, even if we think about individually, if I individually try to be a more open person and more caring and so on and so forth, where I exercise this is on my immediate relationships. And so while I'm changing myself, I'm changing the relations, and the relations are changing me. So there's a relational aspect here that is unavoidable, right? Okay. But I wanted to say social movements have and then let me just link the ideas. And then, of course, then it's a matter of extending this, right? Because, okay, I changed, I have a different relationship to my family, but I still go to work and it's difficult. But now this sphere must be changed. And then you come to face challenges that are more and more structural. So then you need to deal with challenges that are structural in a structural manner. So, for instance, in social movements that can have structural effects. But I also want, so I highlighted the therapeutic aspect of social movements, that I also wanted to highlight, I mean, the importance of movements for social health, so to speak, right? Because I want to highlight this because depending on the kind of woundedness that we consider, I mean, it's very difficult that a person with certain conditions, in a certain situation, will enter the social movement, and the movement will, do all the therapeutic, will provide all the therapeutic aspects that are necessary. So people do need, individual care and so on and so forth. So that's also why it's important that movements for, social health are also successful in establishing the conditions that people can have proper care. So there are more, because of course it can happen that, you have series of wounded personalities and they meet, and then what you have is conflict, is not alliances, right? Because people because because it's very difficult to change ourselves psychologically. It's a long process. So yeah, I think that's what I can say about this topic. Going to the next one, Joseph, I think I agree with you, and I'm happy to hear your comments about the importance of reflecting on oneself, and at the same time establishing other new relationships with the community, and the role of social love there. I think that's really crucial. I'm going to stick to something that you said by the end of your comment, which is we give what we have, right? And that's also an interesting way of understanding these arguments about resonance, because when we establish a relationship of control with ourselves, right? If we try, I try to control my emotions, which means I'm trying to suppress my emotions, or I will try to, be the most efficient that I can in a sort of a calculative sense. So in short, if I try to dominate myself, simply suppress my emotions, what I offer to the others is the same thing. It's also domination, right? The relationship that we have to others is the relationship we have to ourselves. And on the other side, if we recognize that we can suffer, that suffering, of course, it's bad, but it's also being vulnerable has these two dimensions, as I try to emphasize. It means, if we suffer, it means that we're open to the world. So that we're open to the other, that the other does affect us. Instead of building a wall, we realize the porosity of this relationship. And so what we can offer the other, if we recognize that we are affected by the world, that we can suffer, so we might care for ourselves, and so we can also care for others. So I think I hope I'm clear that there is, as you said, we give what we have, and I think that's an important element of what I was trying to argue before.
Joseph, do you agree, Joseph? Sorry.
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So moving on to Francesca, the role of rage. I think that's really crucial, and it's something that I first wrote another paper, some years ago that gave origin to this new paper. It was a really important question for me that I did not develop, but there was the question also of aggressiveness, of violence, right? Because the way that I'm trying to think, in this paper is, as I said, the power of emotion, our force, that we discover a strength. But as you said, this sort of power, which, right? As you pointed out, appears as suffering first, then appears as a refusal. And this moment of refusal is the moment of rage, so to speak, right? The moment of indignation. And I think it's also important. So it's important to consider the role that this have, that rage have in terms of as a motivation to change the world. It's also important, I think, to consider the different ways in which we deal with it, right? Because here, I think one of the things that came to my mind, in this paper, everything works, right? But I think it's also important to think about what can go wrong at each step, so to speak. So in this moment of refusal, indeed, rage can become overwhelming, for instance, right? And can spill into really aggressive relationships to potential allies, for instance. But I think your point was another one. But I fully agree with your point that rage is important. But the next step is to organize this power. So it's the question of how to organize it in a way that it's well directed. Just to mention one more thing that came to my mind. So I also write about the authoritarian personality. And a classical argument in the theory of authoritarian personality, in critical theory, is that there is this rage that is sort of misdirected, right? So you have an authoritarian father, for instance. I mean, these are the terms of the theory, which is the representative of, a repressive society. But you, instead of acknowledging this, you suppress the idea and think, no, 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 I love my father. He's such a wonderful figure. I wanted to be like him. But then all this rage goes somewhere. And so instead of going up against the dominator, it goes against the dominated, against women, against children, against immigrants, etc., etc. So I think it's really important that we think the directions of rage, so to speak. Then Anna's question, also a comment. I think, yeah, I fully agree with what you said. I think it's really interesting to hear your comments. I want to highlight, I mean, what you said about climate change, right? Because it's also something that comes to my mind every time that I go back to this text. That, yeah, I mean, yeah, I had the project of writing these arguments concerning climate movements. I'm not sure I'm going to do that, but I think it fully applies as well. I mean, because it's even clearer, right, that we're dealing with the fact that we're human beings that are vulnerable, that can die, that. But I think your point was another one, right? I mean, your point was that we are already doing something, and indeed, I think maybe I don't have much to add except that I try to apply this perspective also when I'm teaching about the topic to my students, where very easily you can slip into this sort of nihilistic perspective that, well, it is like this, and then people very clearly start rationalizing in the psychoanalytical sense, saying, well, but these are things that I heard in class. Well, but my religion says that everything dies anyways, or you can think of any other justification. That's why I think it's really important, even when we are confronted with these examples that we might feel powerless, it's important to recognize that we have power and that power is exerted to some degree already. So it's a matter of expanding it. And finally, to Donato's question, yeah, I think, well, it's really interesting. Not by chance, I think this is interesting, right? I'm Zimmelian as well. I think the way that I read Lukács is already very much informed by Zimmel. So I think this distinction between the two dimensions of reification, I think I learned to see this in Lukács by reading Zimmel. So I think it's also present there because he also emphasizes, on the one hand, how we might feel powerless with regard to this world that seems gigantic, right? And on the other hand, he also emphasizes how there's a loss of qualitative aspect of social relations or relations to ourselves. And I think this is present in Rosa. So from a distance, I would say fully present in Rosa. But I know Rosa also a little bit on a personal level, and I would say that it's present there, but I mean, it didn't come to him via Zimmel, I would say. It's just, I think also these ideas that are present in Zimmel are very disseminated in German classical social theory and contemporary social theory. So they are present everywhere, so to speak. So Rosa sees them in Zimmel, he sees them in Horkheimer, Fromm, Adorno, so in terms of history of sociology, I wouldn't say there's a direct link, but there is certainly a link. And concerning your comment about how resonance and Wechselwirkung interaction or reciprocal action, one of the translations, come from physics. I think that's interesting. I never thought about that, but you're totally right. And I think what I can say about it is that I think in both cases, both in Zimmel and in Rosa, there is a, they both emphasize how, so there's a continuity. They both emphasize how we're part of life. So the distinction between nature and culture, even though is there, they both authors also sort of make more fluid this distinction. So maybe taking terms from physics has this intention, or at least the effect, because right, I mean, Zimmo in the preface to the Philosophy of Money, he says, yeah, I mean, life means that everything is interconnected. So if we want to understand the world, we can start by any object, because you just need to pull the rope, to the other objects. And Rosa is also saying, that this is, I think, it's difficult argument for him, because if we go to physics, then it gets really difficult. But anyways, there is this idea, at least, that resonance doesn't happen only between human beings, but that things in the world resonate. So that's what I can say, I think, about this. Thank you very much again for all the questions. It was really, really interesting, really, really rich for me to hear. And I hope
Arthur, maybe we have to change the title of this Dialogic meeting, because the real title is resistance, not at the end for you, especially. Not so much Dialogic, but sorry for this, but it was so much interesting, so that's why. So Vincenzo is here. Only 2 minutes more, because we have to close, and of course it's
Good evening. Thank you for this presentation.
Yes, Vincenzo, I give the floor to Vincenzo. I would like to say only one thing at the end, and then we close with Arthur. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question about interpersonal relationship. This morning, I completed a series of interviews with elderly people placed within care facilities. So we could identify it as a small community, a small group. And what I noticed is that culturally, the process of structuring emotional processes breaks down. Specifically, empathy is mistaken for compassion. And this does not allow for a peaceful interaction between caregiver and patient. For example, power relation. In your opinion, is it possible to explain this through the process of experiencing and role-taking, or are they about the other cultural aspect, for example, the Zimmerlerleben?
What is I didn't understand the last word. You said the cultural aspect,
patient in structure for assistance. Structure for elderly people.
So just to see if I understand the question is if I think that the sort of categories that I expose also apply in such framings, settings.
Yeah, for people in explain other this group. This small group.
I mean, theoretically, yes, and I would love if that were the case. I know that my categories are very abstract in the way that they presented them, but I think the idea, I mean, I would want to hear you more, actually. I thought it was really interesting what you said about they mistake empathy for compassion, and I was wondering what exactly that meant. I mean, does this mean that the caregivers are empathetic, but then the patients understand this as compassion? Is it in a bad sense, or overly in the bad sense of like, oh, you're victimizing me?
In bad.
Yeah, you think I'm not, I'm an object of pity or something like this. Okay, that's really interesting. I think that's something that I didn't think about, and would be important at the moment in my scheme, where I emphasize how we recognize that we are affected by the world, we recognize that the other is affected, but a lot, again, I mean, a lot can go wrong there, right? And I think you're highlighting something that can go wrong when you care, and when you are structurally in a sort of this power position, because the power, the structure of power there is very important in this in resulting into what you said, because of course it's not a horizontal relationship. So how can one care for the other without implying that the other is in this sort of victimized position as object, right? And I think, yeah, I would love to hear more about your research, because I can imagine, I can only imagine, right? Many things that can go wrong there, right? And how can the caregiver also respond? This is also a sort of impersonal relationship, right? But depends on very personal dynamics. And so the person who is being taken care of might also expect a lot from the caregiver that the caregiver cannot give, because it's his or her profession, and also the therapy or the caring activity also demands some distance, right? I mean, what I can connect to Rosa's theory is that resonance implies connection, but also implies difference. So you cannot resonate, you cannot have two things that are the same resonate. In order for them to resonate, they must be different. So resonance is not fusion with the other. Resonance is two different things that find a connection. So tension is important in resonance, right? It's not everything is fine and so on. Heterogeneity is important. So I think that's what I can say, but I would really look forward to hearing more. Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Vincenzo. So we would like to say to you at the end that in reality for us, it was really important to have you here also because, for example, in many occasions, even in one paper written by Saria Nafi, for example, resonance and social love are really strictly related, especially on the same direction, of course, because I think that we can share with the theory of resonance, of course, the theory, of course, we are very small, and Armut Rosa, you, and also Frankfurt School, and they are the giants, of course. But at the same time, we share the same, we can say the same diagnosis, as you said, for example, especially the critique to the calculation, the instrumental action, and also a lot of things, but and the same direction as well, the same direction. So the same need of recognition among people, among communities, and among collectives as well, collective bodies as well. And but there are differences as well, and we had I can reveal to you that we had the opportunity to read together in a communitarian way papers from Harmut Rosa, and of course we are not the only ones. Of course, we find very strict connections, but at the same time a strict resonance with him as well, with his thought, but at the same time some critical points. The critical points are related especially to the risk of molecularization, individualization, of course, as you said, for example, but also the risk of a new sort of way, in a bourgeois way, of justifying the status quo. Okay, this is I don't know. This is the risk, of course. And another point which is very important, for example, here there are okay, you are Latin American as well, but there are, for example, Joseph, Jay, and other people coming from all around the world. Of course, this is a very strictly Western point of view. And so this is why, for example, for us, it was really important, for me especially, meeting you, it was really important because, of course, because you have this kind of sensibility coming from Latin America, and it is clear because, for example, connecting the topic of body with the topic of resonance is very important because another critical point of resonance theory could be being very abstract, very intellectual. We can say in a sense that it is only something a little bit spiritual, very, very nice and very inspiring and very important. But this is another point which is very important. And so other cultures can, of course, push on this kind of recognition. And at the same time, talking about a revolution is very interesting as well, because our group, for example, calls social love and solidarity. But at the same time, we have a very big discussion among us as well, but about this binomial, because it is not so clear. Of course, there are two different traditions. We can say that social love comes, it is strictly related with the critical theory, but at the same time, solidarity is more strictly related with Marxism as well, but also functionalism as well. And so talking about revolution, in the sense that we were talking about before with Annie, but also about feminism, about, I don't know, body and other contributions, is also very important because we are talking about a revolution which could be big, but also very the macro and the micro level as well. And so a daily revolution, we for example, in our book, and I think resonance could be also pushed in this sense, we think that it's important in an empirical way rediscovering and rediscovering the critical potential of people, the critical potential of groups, the critical potential of. And so in this way, of course, this is the same way, but not in not justifying the status quo, not only with this individualistic way of thinking, maybe this abstract or spiritual way of thinking, but also very practical. So that's why we say that love is not only an emotion, but it's an emotion, as you say, it's something that moves. Moves people, but we don't have to move people as sociologists. We can be part of this this movement. We are part of this movement. We can give a contribution, but also we have to wear the glasses to look at these movements that are very. The forest is very peaceful, so it's very important in this sense. I don't know, so. This is...
I fully agree. I mean, thank you so much again for the invitation. I mean, it was really a pleasure to hear you all and also to go from my very abstract ideas to the, to empirical research, to concrete examples. That was very rich for me. I look forward, I mean, that we continue this dialogue, this conversation. I want to hear more, read more about social love. I think, yeah, we have a match, so to speak, because I think indeed we're in the same direction as you, Silvia, and others from you also highlighted that it has been interesting to hear you about the importance of this sort of idea that was also important for me, that we are always in movement, so to speak, as you just said. We're already in movement. The question is, how do we steer the movement in this or that direction? But that we are moving, it's already a fact. That we are establishing relations of social love, it's a fact, right? So us as sociologists, we want to understand this and understand how can it go in one way or another. And I just because exactly what I wanted to avoid is, and I think this group also wants to avoid, as if I understood it correctly, is a sort of this dichotomy, this bad dichotomy between like, oh, being disillusioned, oh, there's nothing that we can do, or being utopic, oh, but we're gonna, so find the middle ground, which is really, I think the idea of social love really contributes to that. And indeed what I tried, I mean, is to sort of rethink the idea of revolution in order to be closer to practices of solidarity, ongoing practices of solidarity. And just a final comment, I mean, since you mentioned, the sort of the Western character or the bourgeois character of certain theories in Europe, I mean, in this case, resonance theory, I think, I mean, very personally, what I see, when I was in Brazil and I was reading, people from critical theory, and then I came to Germany and I, saw, here, I realized because then you read authors differently, right? When you meet them and when you see the environment where they are discussing. And then I realized that what happens to these authors when they go to Brazil, a lot of times is that they become more radical. But we don't notice that. We just we think we're repeating the author. But because, of course, in Brazil, the reality of social struggles and inequality, it cannot be, it must be radical in some sense, it acquires this sort of sharpness, so to speak. So yeah, so I hope we can do that together and
Yes,
continue
we
the
do
dialogue.
Thank you very much for your resistance. So, no, thanks.
It was a pleasure.
Yes, thanks to everybody. See you for the next time, and Merry Christmas to everybody, and festivities from the north to the south of our world. Ciao, bye-bye.
I have a question.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you so
Boa
much.
Very
tarde.
interesting.
Ciao.
I'm joking.
Thank you.
Boa tarde, ciao.
Bye bye.
Noisy around me.
Thank you.
Muito obrigada,
Muito
Arthur.
obrigado.
Muito
Grazie
obrigada.
mille. Grazie mille.
Ciao.
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 Ok.
Grazie, Arthur. Un abbraccio.
Abraço.
Un abrazo. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.